All right, welcome everyone to this new Liberty at Home series. Today we have the great fortune to talking to Dr. Zitelmann. And before I introduce him, I just wanted to say hi. My name is Dr. Wolf von Laer. So we have three doctors across two people here today. And I'm the
Two
CEO
Germans.
and two Germans. So you will get like a lot of German accent here today. You will be an expert at deciphering Germans from now on. And I'm the CEO of Students for Liberty, an international organization that empowers students here in the United States, but also all around the world, so that they become more educated in the ideas of liberty, free markets, free speech, philosophy, and so many other topics. And our students just in the last year went out and organized 2,700 events with over 120,000 people all across the world in a single year. And this event is one of those many that we are organizing. And I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Zitelmann today. How are you?
Yes, I'm great and I'm fine. And it's a pleasure for me to be here again. I had the honor to support some of your events. I remember this LibertyCon in Washington last year. We were in Frankfurt, another event, and in some other cities. So good to see you again.
Likewise. And today we will talk about his interesting research, which is actually his second book about the rich. This one is titled The Rich in Public Opinion. And this is really fascinating. And Dr. Zitelmann has really interesting things to say about that because his background is fascinating. So let me just introduce you all to him. Mr. Zitelmann started off as an historian, and he got his first PhD as a historian, writing about Hitler and his policies in Germany. It's one of the seminal works in that space. Then he worked as an academic historian, journalist, founded a PR firm, made some more money by investing into real estate. And then in 2016, so recently, he got his second PhD in sociology about the very study that we're talking about today, about the rich and how they're perceived in public opinion. And Mr. Zitelmann has written so far 24 books in the latest count, and published articles in numerous outlets here in the United States with Forbes, but also in Germany, in France, in Italy, and all around the world. So welcome again, but without further ado, let's jump in now. So this is now The Rich in Public Opinion, which actually our friends at the Cato Institute has published. You can find it online there if you want to get a copy, or Amazon, or wherever you receive your books. But you had like another one written, which is about the wealth elite. It's an empirical study where you interviewed a dozen of rich and super rich individuals. So let me ask you first, what motivated you to study rich people more?
Yes, when I started with this topic, I found out that there is almost nothing scientific about how to get rich. This was the reason why I read this book about the wealth elite. Sure, there are a lot of self-help books, how to get rich in 7 months or something like this. But I speak now about scientific facts, and it's almost easier to find a scientific study that's no joke about the heartbeat of a pig during a 100-meter race, or about the life of rare insects, than about how to get rich. But I think there are so many people who want to get rich. All those people who play in the lottery, for example. I think everyone who plays their lottery, not to win maybe $10 or something like this, but hopefully to win $1 million. And there are so many people who want to get rich, and I found out that there are almost nothing, only very few scientific studies. And so what I did with this first book, The Wealth Elite, by the way, this was my second doctoral thesis. I conducted interviews with 45 rich people. Most of them had a net worth between 30 million and 1 billion euro. And in the end, the transcriptions filled 1,700 pages. And I wanted to know about their biography, about their attitudes, and especially I wanted to find out whether there's a correlation between their personality traits on the one hand and their financial success on the other hand. So this was my first book. And the other book that you mentioned, this book, The Rich in Public Opinion, this is as well about rich people, but it's a completely different topic and a completely different approach, because I wanted to know what the population thinks about rich people. So I commissioned a survey in United States, in UK, in France, and in Germany, and we asked their representative sample of people in these 4 countries to find out what these people in these different nations, what they think about rich people. And the reason why I wrote this book is you have a lot of books, thousands of books and scientific essays in scientific journals about prejudices against, for example, Jewish people, against Black people, against gay people, even against overweight people or against poor people. But there was almost nothing about prejudice and stereotypes against rich people. And I'm sure, of course, there are a lot of prejudice and stereotypes about rich people. And I want to find out whether there are differences between these different nations, how they think about rich people.
That certainly is fascinating, because we hear always like a lot of rhetoric, like eat the rich, and they're put at everything's fault. And there's so many studies about inequality and that it has negative effects, which certainly can be true. But it's interesting that you approach it from a different perspective. So looking at the rich in public opinion piece, what would you say are the most 2 striking findings in your research that you didn't anticipate, how people see the rich?
Oh, yes, there are a lot, but let me mention maybe, yes, 2 first. The one is the differences between the nations. What we did, we asked the people some dozens of questions. And in the end, we separated their 3 groups. One group we called the envious, the other group the non-envious, and then in the middle, the ambivalent people. So according to their answers to these questions. And then we compared the different nations. What we did was we calculated something that we called the social envy coefficient. This means the correlation between envious and non-envious in a country. To make it a little bit easier, the higher the number is, the more envious are the people in one nation. If I tell you now the results, most envious people you find in France. We had the social envy coefficient with 1.21. Then was Germany with 0.97. That means the number of envious and non-envious people is almost equal there in Germany. But then we had United States with only 0.42, what means there are not so many envious people as in France and in Germany. And then UK was 0.37. So it was funny that it was the attitudes of people in UK and United States were almost identical. There were only a few differences, but one thing was very important. And when I speak now about the United States, what maybe is very, very interesting for our audience in the United States, that there's a huge, huge difference between young and older Americans. The younger Americans are much, much more envious than the older one. I give you an example. For example, we had one question. This was a statement. We confronted the interviewers with a statement: rich people are good in making money, but usually they are no decent people. So they are not decent people. And for example, 40% of younger Americans agreed with this statement, and only 23% disagreed. But from older Americans, only 15% agreed, but 50% disagreed with the statement. So it was with a lot of other questions. For example, we had one question we called the zero-sum belief to test. You know, some people think rich people are only rich because poor people are poor. And the younger Americans, a lot of them believe in this zero-sum thinking, and the older Americans not. So the older Americans are this way, like we think in Europe about Americans, critical to the state and no taxes and generally a positive attitude to rich people. But with the young people, now I understand why there are so many Bernie Sanders fans with this young people. And what is more interesting, this difference was not so in Europe. On the contrary, first, the difference between older and younger interviews was not so big in European countries. But if there was a difference, it was the other way around. So it means the younger people, for example, in Germany, are a little bit more positive about rich people than the older people. And in France, it's the same. So this is only true for United States, that young people are so very skeptical and critical towards rich people.
That's fascinating. So to just summarize this, because it's really interesting to take this in, is like one part that the UK as well as the United States are generally have a more positive view towards rich people compared to specifically France, but also the rest of Europe. And the other thing is that young people in the United States seem to be like much less positively inclined to in their opinions about rich people than the older generation. So that's very interesting.
Yes,
but
excuse me, I forgot something. We had a very narrow definition of envy because everyone has another definition of what envy is. And for me, typical for envious people is that they don't want to close the gap between them and the rich if they improve their own situation, but their most important thing is to make situation worse for rich people, even if they have no advantage from this. I will give you one example from one of our questions. We confronted the interviews with a statement, I think it would be fair to increase taxes substantially for millionaires, even if I would not benefit from it personally. And a lot of people agreed with this. Or there was another statement, I would favor drastically reducing manager salaries and redistributing the money more evenly among their employees, even if that would mean that the employees would get only a few more dollars per month. So it's always the same principle to make situation for rich people worse, even if you have not an advantage for yourself. And the last one, this was a little bit funny, especially for you as someone coming from Germany. You will see why. We had the statement, when I hear about a millionaire who made a risky business decision and lost a lot of money because of it, I think it serves him right. And we called it the Schadenfreude question. And the only nation where there were more people who agreed than disagreed was Germany. So now you know why the word, the German word Schadenfreude comes from Germany to the English language, because I think you know it very good, because this is very typical for German people, the Schadenfreude.
So Schadenfreude, now for everyone who is maybe not familiar with that term, it is being used in English as well. It's originally a German term. It just means you are being happy if somebody else perceives like a damage to themselves. And so and that's very envious, of course. I mean, that's really fascinating what you're pointing out there. And I think most of this is due to the fact that I think most individuals around the world really don't understand economics, and they don't understand, like, if somebody becomes wealthy, if they don't do it through the hand of the government, if they don't lobby for that, they tend to only become wealthy because they produce value for somebody else, because somebody gives them money. Like somebody gave Bill Gates money for Microsoft because some people got value from using Word or whatever. And most people don't get that. But Dr. Zitelmann, rich people are rich, right? They have made it. Why would we care what the average Joe or Joette thinks about rich people?
Yes, because the average Joe in a democracy, he's a voter, and the politicians, they have to take into account his attitudes. And for example, if average Joe is very envious, then politicians would make a different policy as if he's not. And so, and for the media, it's the same. But especially, I think, for politicians, if they have the feeling that they can get a lot of votes with this. So you see, I think my research is interesting to understand what happened in the Democratic Party now in the United States. You know, we had there the competition between politicians like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren with this very aggressive anti-rich rhetoric on the one hand, and Joe Biden, who was compared with them a little bit more moderate, not so aggressive against rich people. And I think even in spite of the fact that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren has a lot of sympathies inside the party, they realized that in the United States, it's only a minority of people who is so extremely envious, according to my study, that the Democrats had the feeling that they can't win the election with all this very aggressive anti-rich rhetoric. And so I think even my book helps a little bit to understand why Joe Biden and not Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren became the nominee of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, I would add like something else that I've been thinking about. I'm curious how you see this. But it also, there might be a correlation, maybe you've studied that, between countries where most young people want to pursue a career in politics or as a bureaucrat. And I could see that there might be a correlation in those countries that most people would also say, like, the rich are, it's not desirable to be rich. We want to have like rather stability, and government is always seen as more benevolent. Do you see this also in your research?
No, I think it's an interesting question, but we had no research about it. But I know I did a lot of I studied the economic development in China, and now it's a very different question. But this was one of the most important things in China, that 40 years ago, all young people want to go to the government, and the most important thing for the economic reforms, you know, that they introduced private property and more market in China when Deng Xiaoping made his economic reforms. But that's for young people, there was a change that more and more young people said, I don't want to go to the government, but I want to be an entrepreneur, because this is the way to become successful and rich. And I spoke with a very interesting Chinese economist, Zhang Wang. By the way, he's a Hayek fan, and he also published a book with Cato. And he told me that this change in China was that what you mentioned was very, very important for their society as a whole.
Yeah, and I would generally say that the more people would say like, hey, I want to become rich, I want to produce value for other human beings, and I want to become an entrepreneur, developing something, tinkering, I think that would be generally very, very good. And so I can see how that plays out.
Yes, sorry, I agree absolutely. And I would be happy if my idea would be that you should send successful entrepreneurs to the schools and to tell children about and students about their career and what they have done, because I don't think the teacher can tell them, look, what did teacher do? He was at school, then he studied, and then he went back to school. I think he's not the best role model for becoming an entrepreneur. And I think he can, in most cases, he can tell young people almost nothing about the advantages to become an entrepreneur. But if you would send startup people and entrepreneurs to the schools and teach them maybe every week 1 and 2 hours about entrepreneurship, I think this would make such a big difference in the education of young people.
Absolutely. And I mean, they would learn so many more skills, because like once you finish school and then university, what do you know about lead generation? What do you know about PR? Like, how do you know how to generate a customer? How do you know how to file taxes? How to register a business? All of these things take a lot of time. And like, if people were to learn more about these processes, maybe they became hungry and trying to learn more. And I think if you ever start a business, that's probably like the fastest path of learning compared to everything else. So I'd like to see that more of that for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And this was, by the way, very interesting result of the first study that you mentioned, the wealth elite. When I conducted the interviews with this 45 rich people, I asked them how they've been at school. And the result was there was absolutely no correlation between their success at school or university on the one hand and their financial success later in life on the other hand. On the contrary, there were some people who even didn't graduate from high school and later on they became billionaires. I think before we had our interview, we spoke about a friend of mine, Theo Müller, who is one of the richest people in Germany with something like 4 or 5 billion euros. And he didn't graduate from high school. He never saw a university, but he became very successful entrepreneur. And so one of the results of this first book was that the most important thing that these people learned was not at school. They learned it outside school, alongside school. For example, half of them were competitive athletes, or they were engaged in early entrepreneurial activities and sales and so on. I think this was also a very important, interesting result for me from this other book.
That's fascinating. And if I may ask you this personal question, I would presume that you have accumulated your wealth not because of that, but despite your academic background, right?
Yes, I think it didn't help me, and I think it's very atypical that someone with 2 doctor degrees became a successful entrepreneur and real estate investor. But you see, it's not a problem. It's also possible for people with 2 doctor degrees to become rich. So.
Yeah, but there is diminishing marginal returns to how much your education can contribute to your income. Because I would say right now, I'm the privileged working with 65 full-time staff members that are distributed around the world and organizing these tens of thousands of events and working with multimillionaires myself who donate to our cause. And I'm sitting here not because I have my academic credentials, but because of all the volunteering that I did on the side for Students for Liberty when I was a student. I learned how to organize an event. I learned how to fundraise and start like a training program and so forth. So the extracurricular activities in your research are very important. So for our audience to hear that, it's not only what you're doing at universities, but also what you're doing in addition to that. So that's very interesting.
Absolutely. I think generally, I think book wisdom, sure, I love books and I write books, but I think book wisdom is sometimes overestimated, especially intellectuals. In their view, people who read most books should be on the top of the society, and maybe this is one reason because why they don't like capitalism, because they don't understand that their former schoolmate, maybe who hasn't read as many books as he has now maybe the better house, the nicer car, and the prettier woman as well. And so we think everything is wrong with the world, and especially with capitalism, because they overestimate this book wisdom and academic degrees.
That makes sense. Switching gears a little bit, the great economist and social philosopher Friedrich von Hayek once argued in several articles that it is somewhat innate within us to be against rich people, because he's arguing we grew up in hunter-gatherer societies, which were like small, tight-knit groups, and where equality was the norm. Yes, there might have been a chief, somebody in charge, but it was not like compared to the society we're living in right now, where they exist very large income distributions. So do you have hope that we can overcome as human beings these more atavistic tendencies to our nature and maybe just like see that rich people actually contribute to society instead of seeing them as quote unquote enemies?
I think, and there's a research in scientific research about envy. I didn't know it before, but you find one chapter in my book. I found it very interesting myself, only about scientific research about envy. And one of the results is that that envy is you have it always. You had it always in history, and you have it in every society. But I think it's much more a problem in societies that promise people that everyone is equal, but in the end we know that not everyone will be equal, but there will be some people who are much better off than other people. And then for these people who are maybe in economical ways not so successful, they try to find a way to explain this, because for example, if you are envious, then you admit that the other one has something that you want to have, but you don't have it. And this causes the question that is sometimes uncomfortable for your self-conscious. Why does he has it and not I? And then you look for explanation, and then you say maybe he has it's only because of luck, or maybe he's good in making money, but maybe it's only because of fraud and exploiting other people. And then you have a very good explanation. Okay, I'm not so successful, but this is only because I'm such a good moral person, and even that I'm not economically successful becomes then a proof that I'm a better person. And I think in a society that promises that in a legal way that all people should be equal, but from the economic outcome it is not the case. That envy is bigger than it was in former societies who didn't have this promise that everyone is equal.
That makes sense. But do you have hope that we can change that over the long run, living in modern society, that people change their minds and actually see like, okay, inequality is not innately bad? Of course, if inequality is the result of people getting unfair advantage or cheating people out of their wealth and accumulating wealth on their own, of course, these things should be adjusted. But do you have a hope that people would be seeing this a little bit more through like a modern lens?
Let me please give a little bit a longer answer in two parts. The first part, I will speak about inequality, my opinion about inequality. And the second part, then the question, is there possible to change the attitude of people? But first, to be honest, I don't care about inequality. Maybe this sounds very provoking for people, but I can explain you why. You know this French economist, Thomas Piketty. And one of his research, the most important result from his research is that in most time of the 20th century, inequality was reduced. The gap between the rich and the poor became bigger in the last 35 years. This is his argument. But if you look in the last 35 years, what happened in this last 35 years? More than 1 billion people all over the world escaped extreme poverty. And this is the same time where inequality increased. And I care more about poor people, and I care more about poverty. I spoke about China before, and I will give you an example. In the time of Mao Zedong, sure, people in China were more equal. But I was very often in China, and if I would have asked people, do you want to go back to Mao's time because people were more equal and you had less billionaires, everyone would ask me whether I'm absolutely crazy. So what do I mean? Look, 1981, 88% of the Chinese people were living in extreme poverty, 88%. Today, it's less than 1%. In the same time, the number of billionaires increased so much as in no other country in the world. Today, you have so many billionaires in China than in no other country except United States. You have some more. So inequality, this what you call the gap between the rich and the poor, widened in this time. But at the same time, a lot of people, almost something between 800 and 900 Chinese people escaped extreme poverty. And so this is why I say inequality is for me absolutely not important. This is important question for envious people. For me, the question of what you can do against poverty, this is the most important thing. And I don't think that these people, for example, in China, or like take another example in South Korea, that they are unhappy about inequality when they escaped this extreme poverty. So, but your question was whether you can change something in the attitude of people, maybe to this questions of rich people and inequality and capitalism. I think that it's a fault of rich people that they don't do, or they do almost nothing against the stereotypes and prejudice against them. They take not part in this discussions in our society. They are very often silent if there are discussions about political topics, and they should learn from other minorities. If you look, example, how the situation changed for other minorities in the last 50 years. Like, take, for example, gay people. 50 years ago, there was a lot of discrimination against gay people. And today, it's a completely different situation for gay and lesbian people in society. But what was the reason? Did anyone else did it for them? No, they learned to stand their ground, to fight for their rights, and this is what this minority did. And so it is with other minorities, with like black people. You speak a lot about racism today, and sure, you have some racism, but I think the situation in a lot of things improved. 50 years ago, you would have no one like Oprah Winfrey, or you would have no black American president like Barack Obama, and so on. So a lot of things changed for black people to a positive way, but it was only because they did something to against stereotypes, against prejudice, and so this difference to rich people. They do almost nothing. Take an example, my book. So I'm rich, and so I could pay it. But this survey in a lot of nations, and I had as well media analysis. This cost me something like $150,000. Okay, I had the money, and I will never earn this with a book. Absolutely impossible. So I could spend it, yes, but I found no one who supported this. I tried it to find people. I wanted to found something like an institute for academic wealth research, to have more research, because I have a lot of ideas what you can research. This should be only the first study. I have a lot of ideas for other study, but this costs money, and I didn't found anyone. And I think even in Europe, it's more difficult than in United States. In the United States, you have some of these think tanks like Cato and Heritage Foundation, and so, and there are some rich people who give them money. But in Europe, it's so very difficult. And I think this is that there are so many stereotypes and prejudice against rich people. I would blame rich people for this, because they have to do something against it. Who else should do it? I'm doing it, but I'm the only one. I can't do it all alone.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because it's also a question I wanted to ask you later. What is it that the rich can do to improve their reputation? And you giving the answer that it's basically about civil advocacy, continuing to have conversation, to present new data as you did. But that raises another interesting question. Why do you think that most rich individuals don't want to engage in that discourse? Do you feel it might be because they're already attacked so much that they don't want to put like a target on their back? Or do you think that there's some other reasons behind that they don't try to, quote unquote, set the record straight?
I think it has different reasons. To be successful in the economy, you have to adapt to external circumstances. Something you have to be a little bit opportunistic, not like if you fight for something, this is not the way you become successful as an entrepreneur, but more if you're more opportunistic. But in political things, it's the wrong attitude. And sure, another reason is they have fear. You see what happens today to organizations, to companies who do something that for leftist people is political incorrect, or it's very easy that they call them racist or sexist, whatever, and then it can damage your very quickly damage um, your company. It happens today very often as well in the United States, that sometimes it's enough to say some word that seems to be wrong. I heard it from the I think the CEO from Adidas. She didn't say something racist, but the only thing that she said, she has not the opinion that in her company there's a big issue with racism. But this was enough after 25 years to force her to step off, for example. And so it can happen very quickly. And so in a way, I understand them, but if you accept this, you make things worse, because people learn, especially all this so-called activists from the left side, they learn if they are aggressive enough and loud enough, and then they will be successful. And what I call this something like an appeasement policy that a lot of rich people and big companies do. Appeasement, they think if they are silent, or if they say, yes, I'm green as you are, and maybe I share your views, and so this could help something, but it makes things worse.
Yeah, that's some interesting points. I never thought about that, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense that some people are hesitant to go out and try to become part of the conversation. Whatever you think about, for instance, about Charles Koch and his multi-billion-dollar business, he's supporting all kinds of academic causes. He supports classical liberalism, but he also supports cancer and the arts and nature. Like many of the museums here in DC, several wings are sponsored by him, but and by his family. But nevertheless, like each time he gets attacked, and it's probably very difficult, and he cannot go anywhere, and his family cannot go anywhere without bodyguards.
And even if you do good things, like take Bill Gates as an example, I think it's a great guy. No one else did so much against hunger and poverty in the world as like he does and his wife does. But he's attacked all over, especially now in the Corona crisis. Yes, people attacked him because they are looking for scapegoats. And this is also one aspect I have in my book, and that is very important. In economic crisis, people look always for scapegoats. It was there all over the history. You can see it in the Middle Ages, for example. They killed between 40 and 60,000, or no, I think 60 to 80,000 women as witches. There was a witch hunt because they told that they were responsible for the plague, or they attacked Jewish people because they said that they poisoned the wells, or all this crazy stuff. And you have this every time in history, that if things were very complicated for people and they couldn't understand it, like it was in the Middle Ages, they didn't knew what were the real reasons for the plague, and so then they look always for scapegoats, and in most cases these are minorities. This can be refugees, this can be black people, but it can be as well rich people. And we have it a lot of times. If you, for example, it's not so long ago, this financial crisis, and in one of my books, The Power of Capitalism, I have one chapter about the real causes of the financial crisis. And I think it has nothing to do with too much capitalism or with deregulation, all this stuff, but this is another story. But it's very complicated, and I know it. I read dozens of books about it, and it's really complicated to understand this with the subprime crisis and what happened there. And, sure, 99.9% of the population, they don't read so many books about it and they don't understand it. But if someone comes there and said, look, these are the greedy bankers, and these are the greedy bankers, and they're responsible, they blame them for such a crisis, then it seems convincing for the people. For me, it's not convincing. It's like if you say, for example, you explain the crash of an airplane with gravity. It's not very logical, but this is what makes it easy for people. And you see it as well in the corona crisis. There are so many conspiracy theory, and a lot are about rich people. They tell people stories like Bill Gates, for example. He's responsible for it. He made the coronavirus to make more billions with a vaccine later on, and these are crazy stories. But this happened very often in history, that rich people became scapegoats, and this is a warning from my book as well. Some people ask me, where's the problem with prejudice and stereotypes against rich people? They have a good life and they live in luxury, and sure, it's true, it's better to be rich than to be poor. I agree, absolutely. But on the other hand, don't forget that words can become deeds, and that's what happened very often in history. I was very shocked. I live here in Berlin, and we had the rallies, demonstrations with posters like kill your landlord, for example, or pictures with a guillotine, and there was written against the city of the rich, and there was a big picture of the guillotine, or London. There were puppets of bankers, or bloody puppets hanging on a lamppost and so on. Look in the internet, you can buy t-shirts like kill the rich, for example. And if you imagine one time you would say similar things to another minority, for example, t-shirt with kill Jewish people or kill black people, yes, everyone would be rightly shocked and outraged. No one would accept it, yes, and no one would accept any demonstration with, with banners and posters like kill any other minority, whatever. Rightly so, everyone would be shocked. But with rich people, it seems to be okay. But don't forget, words can become deeds. And I'm an historian, you mentioned before. And a lot of people, they don't know so much about history. But in the 20th century, we had a lot of situations where rich people were even murdered and killed, like between more than 500,000 so-called kuliks in Russia and Soviet Union at this time. So it's been wealthy peasants. And you had similar things happening in the Cultural Revolution in China. You had this in Cambodia, and there are a lot of examples. And one of my favorite books is by George Gilder. I don't know how you pronounce it, George Gilder, or I don't know. Wealth and Poverty.
Gilder, yeah.
Gilder, Wealth and Poverty is his book, and he writes in his book, there's an unwritten history about how rich people became victims in history, and this is not written. So this would be a very interesting thing if there's one in the audience, maybe an historian, and maybe I give him the idea to look whether it's possible in the United States to write a doctoral dissertation about this very interesting topic, rich people as victims in different societies in the 20th century. This is a book that should be written, but it is not written. And this is what I meant when I said before, rich people should support scientific studies about such topics. But I think it would be very, very difficult to have a doctoral dissertation at a university, because we had an interview in Forbes, and I learned that you told me that there the relation, I think, between leftist and conservative professor is 12 to 1 at the universities. And I saw now another research, and in the below the professors, the like assistant professor, and so the relation today is 40 to 1 between leftist and conservative at American universities. So there's a lot of research that should be done at universities about topics like this, but it is not done. And what I want to do, my book is only the first thing, and I hope a lot of students now listen to this, and I will encourage them with this book. And it's only a beginning. I can tell you so many interesting topics from scientific research about this thing, and I hopefully I can motivate young people to go deeper in the stuff and to have more research about these topics.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, there are so many interesting nuggets of wisdom that you've just shared. Let me just highlight two of them. One being that words become deeds very quickly, and we really need to be careful about that. So if we, as folks who are interested in the peaceful exchange of ideas, when we see that like one specific group is blamed, and it might be the left, it might be the right, it might be people of color, it might be all kinds of different things, then or bankers, we should always be wary about this and where this is coming from. Because that is often not helping any kind of discourse or any kind of subtlety, and the world is always more complicated than that. And I would like to point out like another great thinker, which is Thomas Sowell, and his work on this, because he also studied specifically minority groups and how often they as immigrants have become more successful financially in societies, and later they were blamed because of their success and then killed. Absolutely. And that happened to Jews, that happened to overseas Chinese, that happened to some certain affluent Black people. And it is really, really unfortunate that this sort of scapegoating happens. That's one thing. The other thing that I find also remarkable in what you're talking about is this discrepancy, and it seems to be widening, between the knowledge creating intelligentsia and then the wealth creating people in business. And there seems to be like not much exchange between these two groups, and there seems to be a disdain from the academic part to the wealth creating part. And that's really unfortunate that we're seeing this more and more, because academia should be in the pursuit of truth, and truth means you have to talk with people with different opinions. But if it becomes like an echo chamber, and it's not everywhere and not at all universities the same, of course, but if the tendency is to become an echo chamber, that will be very harmful to society in the long run. But let's try to give our audience a couple of tips from your research. And what we can learn, and maybe to become more affluent. So my question is, what can our audience learn to replicate some of the character traits of the affluent in their lives in order for them to become successful?
Yes, it's a good question. And first of all, I want to tell you, I tell this every people about my books. People who look for easy recipes, how to become rich, please don't buy my books, like this book, The Wealth Elite. I have some other books, like one book that was published a few months ago. It's Dare to be Different and Grow Rich, and it's very successful now it's in 10 languages. And I would recommend this book, Dare to be Different and Grow Rich. The Wealth Elite is a little bit more complicated, but in both cases, it's the wrong attitude if you look for someone who gives you an easy recipe, like you have it in a lot of this how to get rich manuals, like do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can become rich. No one becomes rich in this way. But have said this, on the one hand, sure, you can learn something. It's more that I give you food for your own thought about yourself, about your attitudes, and so on. For example, if I have my lectures about how to become rich, I ask the audience always, if you want to get rich, and if you would have the opportunity to speak in the next 3 months with 45 very rich self-made people who made between $30 million and $1 billion to learn about their biography, about their attitudes, about their experience. Would you be interested to speak with this 45 rich people in the next 3 months? And sure, everyone raises hands, but the problem is most of the people don't know 45 super rich people. And so this is what I did for you. I had these interviews with these people, and in my book, The Wealth Elite, you have a lot of quotes. You can understand how they think, and I will give you maybe two examples. What is very important to think about your own attitude. For example, one of these things is most of them enjoyed swimming against the stream, and I think it's logical. If you do the same as everyone else, you will get only the same as everyone else. You can't get super rich. You have to be you have to enjoy to swim against the stream. And I think this is especially interesting for people like you and Students for Liberty, because this is what you are doing anyway every day at the university, to swim against the stream. And so you have the first precondition, the correct attitude to become rich. And I know it for myself, because I was always in my life a nonconformist who had fun to swim against the stream. And I know it sometimes very difficult as well, for example, at the university and political discussions. But with investments, I learned it. It's really an advantage, yes, if you don't listen to what everyone else does. And it's a real advantage. I became rich as a contrarian investor when I did things that no one else, or almost no one else did. So this is one thing. And another very important thing, if you learn what I learned from the attitudes of rich people, is that don't blame external circumstances and don't blame anyone else if you have a setback or if you fail, because there's a difference between most people. For most people, it's this way: if they are successful, they take the responsibility, of course, for their success. They say maybe to themselves and to their wife, so now you see how smart am I. But on the contrary, if they fail, if they have a setback, then they blame other people, maybe their parents, maybe their boss, or maybe injustice in society, or capitalism, or racism, or whatever. A lot of people today, they like to see themselves as victims. And I think as long as you see yourself as a victim, this makes you helpless. Yes, you should understand that if you take the responsibility as well for your setbacks and for failure, then you become the master of your own life. And this was one of the results when I had these interviews with the super rich people. This was something that they all had in common. When they had the setbacks, and most of them had serious setbacks during their life, they blamed only one single person, and that was they blamed themselves. And if you, there are a lot of other points, but if you only think a moment about this thing, you're about swimming against the stream, have pleasure to swim against the stream, who do you blame when you have setbacks? These are only two of these things you can learn. But don't look for the simple advice. There are I met so many people who look, they want to find someone who tells them, do now exactly this and that, and then you become rich. But with this attitude, you will never become rich. So my books are not for this kind of people. My books are for people who want to, I give them food to think about themselves, about their own life, about their own attitude.
I liked it a lot. So it's basically taking ownership over one's lives, own decisions, one's failures, but also one's successes. And that is a good reminder. And that's what we're also trying to do with our students, because we put them in charge of our programs. And if they fail and they get feedback. But if they succeed, then they're learning something as well in both cases. And I think what I also took away from your books is that entrepreneurs who are very successful later on, they start young and they're doing all kinds of different jobs, and they're trying to sell and always trying to make some money in some ways. And they start at a very early age. So don't wait until you go into university to do something on the side. Just to try to make money immediately in some ways. And through trial and error, you might find like a way that succeeds and how you can succeed in fulfilling customers' expectations. We have like one question.
Sorry, absolutely. Yes, I can give you a funny example. I told you I have often lectures in China, and one time I was in Beijing and I spoke to a lot of people, and the youngest there in the audience, he was only 10 years old. And after my lecture, he came to me and he spoke very good English. And he asked me, I have a question, I want to grow rich. What do you think, when is the best time to start my own business? He was 10 years old.
That's beautiful.
That's
I like that
attitude.
a lot.
Asian people, they have, I admire them. This is the reason. They are really hungry. You see it in the United States. If you see the income pyramid, you know, it's with black people, Latino people, white people, and Asian people. Because these Asian people, they are so hungry for success, whether it is making money or in university, and I admire them. This attitude of Asian people.
We have like one question from somebody from Kenya, actually, also tried to make money. So it has nothing to do with the conversation here. But she asks, what kind of advice would you give somebody who's into real estate right now to push through the COVID-induced crisis within real estate as well?
It depends what kind of real estate. I have also some investments in the United States in real estate. I have 2 apartments in Manhattan near the Fifth Avenue, and this is very bad now. I note I'm negotiating at this moment a new lease contract, and I have to reduce leases because it's a bad situation. But I'm as well invested in a kind of REIT fund that is engaged in commercial property, and it depends how the crisis will go on. You know, you have to differentiate whether it's office or whether it's retail. So it's hard to say something about it because everything depends how the economy will go on, and we don't know it from the United States. If you look at what happens at the stock exchange, people seem to be more positive than negative. But on the other hand, you know it better than me. You have now every day more than 60,000 new people infected in the United States, and I think there's again a shutdown in California and something like this. And it depends how this crisis will go on and in what kind of real estate you're invested. I think residential real estate is maybe not such a big problem as maybe especially retail, and with retail it was anyway difficult time because Amazon and all this competition was very big before. And you see it if you look at the share prices of Amazon, what happened there. But this means on the other hand that it's very difficult for traditional retail business.
Very true. And every crisis also presents opportunity. Many millionaires have been made in the Great Depression and in the Great Recession. And right now this will also be the case, but not, unfortunately, many people are also suffering. But now we have heard a little bit from your research. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us some insight. I know that you have to have another interview quite soon, but I hope that the audience took a lot of nuggets away from this conversation, like take ownership over your own life, start early, read, but read not too much. Don't invest too much in your education. Just go out and learn by doing. And yes, Dr. Zitelmann, thank you so much for all of your research. And if folks are interested, go to Cato and check out this book, The Rich in Public Opinion. And otherwise, go to Dr. Zitelmann's website. Just Google his name and you will find a lot of content that he's producing all the time. Dr. Zitelmann, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate. Maybe I can add one last thing, what is very important for me. In Germany, I'm very active with social media, but with and as well with Twitter, but more Facebook. But only a few days ago, I think 3 days ago, I started with Twitter account only in English language. So yes, and I would appreciate very much if I think I have now only like 30 followers there on Twitter, because I started 2 days ago. In Germany, I have on different social media more than 50,000, and I would appreciate you can read a lot of articles all in English language if you look for my only English Twitter account now, and please share it. Maybe you become number 31 today, hopefully.
Wonderful. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Dr. Zitelmann, and all of you have a wonderful day.
Thank
Goodbye.
you very much. Thank you.
1 second.